All right, hot topic here for Wednesday morning. Don't have any games to talk about yet for Mauricio Pochettino, but we do have some quotes from his press conferences to chew on. He touches on MLS players in the United States men's national team, a contentious issue amongst the fan base. Should a European-based player, should MLS-based players be included? What does he say here, Jason?
So these are quotes from an interview he did in Spanish with CNN, dated October 4th. He does also mention Lionel Messi as kind of context for these quotes. He says, we see great players like Lionel Messi competing in MLS, and kind of gives MLS some of its flowers. And then he says, I think we also have to believe that the players who are competing in MLS will also have the opportunity to be able to demonstrate their talent in the national team. There are many players who are in Europe and who don't play much and who don't compete. And there are other players who are in MLS or in different leagues that compete. And perhaps those players are in better shape to perform than players who perhaps don't compete weekly. So I don't, this is before he stepped onto the field to coach the team that he called up for the games against Panama and Mexico. So that the context is a little, this is before he actually was working with any players. But I think it's interesting that he's bringing this up. Now, no coach is going to say bad things about any potential pool of national team. Like, why would you step in and go, you know what, MLS players? No, we don't need them. We can't have them. You're limiting yourself pretty immediately there. He's a smart guy. He's not going to do that. Whether this is legitimately his belief that players who are playing in Major League Soccer should be ahead of players who aren't playing in Europe, I don't think you could generalize this, Robert. I think this has to be individual player by individual player. And yeah, can you risk throwing a guy into a meaningful game for the U.S. men's national team if he hasn't played a meaningful match for his club team in Europe in weeks? Do you have a better option? I mean, that's the thing. Is the player from MLS or wherever else better? Like, how do you? He's got metrics. He's got eyes. He's trying to figure that stuff out, and we can't know until we see what kind of team he puts on the field in these matches. But obviously, in matches that actually matter.
Well, this at the end of the day, I mean, this is a people business, and that means subjectivity and analysis of the situation has to come into play. I mean, what are you going to say? That say hypothetically, the best player on Inter Miami was an American player, and he was playing game in and game out. There's no way you just out of hand discount him and throw him on the trash heap because
Right.
of the
Right.
league he played in compared to someone who's like getting sparse minutes at a mid-table team in Europe. Like that just wouldn't make any sense. And to your point, I mean, part of being a national team coach is you're a politician to a degree, or you have to play the
Yes.
politics game. And like you
Yes.
said, you don't want to sully a whole swath of your talent pool right off the bat. I mean, who knows if he's even gone to an MLS game yet and knows what that level even really
Oh, I
looks
think he
like for
has.
himself.
No, I think he has. I mean, I think he's at least watched MLS. I mean, again, there's no sense at all. I don't think that any modern manager hired for a job like this is going to be the type of guy. I don't know. You say what you want about Jurgen Klinsmann, but Jurgen Klinsmann got the job with the U.S. men's national team off the back of what he did for Germany in 2006, and the fact that he was a world famous former player who was outspoken, who lived in the United States and had an affinity for the American game. Right. I think a lot of what happened with Jurgen Klinsmann comes down to Sunil Gulati's fixation on getting a big name to coach the U.S. men's national team before we were in a position to attract somebody like Mauricio Pochettino, maybe. Although I know that I've seen the quotes from J.T. Batson that said we actually didn't know who we could attract for this job until we asked. Like we just asked, hey, would you be interested? And we were surprised to see that yes, somebody like Pochettino was interested. Like maybe U.S. soccer was holding itself back is the point there. But in terms of this kind of thing, I mean, maybe Klinsman didn't appreciate him. I don't know. I mean, again, Klinsman said things about MLS that riled MLS up that also seemed to cause him problems he didn't need. And he didn't have to say those things. Whether he believed them or not, he's the coach. He gets to choose the team. He can say things like, oh, I don't think MLS is the right place for our players internally. He can send that message to his players internally and hope that they're not going to go spread it around media. He doesn't have to come out in the public sphere and say it. So Pochettino's not going to he's not going to bash MLS. Now, he may also believe that the better place for players to be is Europe, but I think he's also giving that right appreciation for how playing time, how competitive minutes, not just training minutes, how competitive minutes matter for where a player is and their ability to contribute on any given day. But of course, there will always be exceptions. Like we don't have this as an example because of the injury, but we would have gotten a pretty good sense of whether or not Pochettino values Gio Reyna as a part of the first team for the United States, despite not playing for Dortmund if he was here. And I think he probably would have Gio Reyna in his starting lineup if Gio Reyna was healthy, regardless of his playing time at Dortmund, because Gio Reyna is a different level of player than anybody who might be getting minutes in Major League Soccer in a similar position.
One of the reasons that I'm excited about Pochettino coming in is having no real prior relationships and not having as many interpersonal entanglements. And I'm sure there's advisors, whispering in his ear, like, who is preferred and who has history and this or that. But he doesn't have like his best friend from 30 years son that's in contention to be picked for the team. I
Well,
mean, that's not as forefront here, which is exciting. But also, I was hoping from our next hire, which we'll see if his job develops into that. I'm hoping that an outside hire would also help usher in a new era of it, making a clearer path for the American domestic player, even to break into the MLS and
yeah. Well,
be a contributor.
there's also another practical reason for Pochettino to say something like this, and it's that we live in the era of dual national panic. I mean, he's going to be smart enough to know that not every dual national player is good enough for the U.S. men's national team, and so let's not get all wrapped up in chasing a player just because he's a dual national. But I think he also recognizes that what you don't want to send a message that if you're in MLS, you can't get into the U.S. men's national team, so you might as well declare for whatever other country you're eligible for. Right. And some of these players are looking to move to Europe, but haven't gotten there yet. Right. And maybe don't know exactly when that's going to happen for them. And they're not sitting there going, well, I guess I'll just wait until I'm 23 and in Europe before I'll care about making the national team. No, they want to make the national team now. Right. You want to give as many incentives for players to perform as possible. And this doesn't have to be a referendum on MLS. This doesn't have to be the national team coach's opinion, whether it's Klinsmann, Arena, Pochettino, whoever, doesn't have to be a referendum on Major League Soccer. A smart coach is going to keep the pool as big as possible because he may need to reach into that pool to find a player here or there, right? And he's not going to, the smart coach is not going to eliminate any part of his pool from his thinking, publicly or otherwise, because it doesn't make any sense. And Nate has a point that there's something to putting pressure on players who are in Europe who aren't playing, right? He's saying, hey, MLS players who are competing every week might be ahead of a European-based player who is only training and not getting competitive minutes. Hey, go find some minutes, people. And maybe Pochettino, this is another knock-on effect of hiring a manager like Pochettino with his reputation and his the recognition that people have of his abilities in Europe, just the friendships and the networks that he has. People are going to pick up the phone for him. He may be able to help those players find places to play. He may be able to nudge things along in ways that the previous managers couldn't, although I think that's overstated how much of a role that a national team coach actually has in any of that.
The cachet of Pochettino, he knows what a world-class player looks like. If he was to call somebody and give him a nudge, hey, why don't you check this player out or this player out, they would definitely, that holds a bit more weight than from previous coaches for sure, just because of who he is and where he's been. Yeah, it doesn't, I mean, he's not going to, change anyone's mind, you think, but he would more likely be a better reference on the resume for a player looking for a position. And hopefully this also makes players looking for a new club consider how likely they are to be playing.
Yeah, look, if you are not a fan of MLS, if you don't think MLS is the kind of level that our national team players should be playing at, you may think this is a negative, because what if a player's in Europe and not playing regular minutes and thinks, well, I need to get to MLS where I know I'll play and then I'll get called up for the national team. We have this thing that we're wrestling with in our fan culture of whether MLS is a place anybody should be playing if they want to be a national team, or whether we should be looking at MLS for national team players at all. Right? One of that this has been a constant debate in the national team fan base, not just in the last 4 or 5 years, but well beyond that. But even and as MLS has gotten better, which is certainly interesting, that this is still a major thing. But it's taken on this very intense level of no MLS player should ever be considered for the U.S. men's national team. They just flat out draw that line in the sand, which is ridiculous, right? To eliminate everybody in MLS by saying the league's not good enough. Nobody from MLS should be called into the U.S. men's national team. They're automatically not good enough simply by virtue of the club they play in. That's insanity, right? That's poor management if you actually had that policy. And so I'm glad that Pochettino doesn't.
Anytime you're dealing with people, and just like a good motto in life is to have balance. If you're extreme one way or another, you're missing out on something. So if I think that original premise was, you want to see the players challenging themselves. Okay, so maybe the first challenge is make it to MLS. And if you are just absolutely dominating and you look like you're starting to become the big fish in the small pond, then yes, seek the next challenge, right?
Right.
It's a person-to-person situation.
Well, that's the problem, right? Because we don't, as human beings, it's hard, and as fans, it's hard for us to talk in those terms because it feels like you're not making a statement. You're not actually taking a stance if you say something like, well, it's player to player. Of course it is player to player, but that doesn't feel like anything. It feels like something to say no MLS player should be in the U.S. men's national team. That feels like something that certain people can agree with. So and certainly you can say Major League Soccer is not as good as name the top 5-10 leagues in Europe, and you'd be right about that. Right? In a general way, you would be right about that. But as is always the case, which is something that is very difficult for us to wrap our heads around, individual players thrive in different circumstances because of circumstances. And Christian Pulisic is a perfect example of this. Now, he's still doing it at a high level, so we don't have to wrestle with this thing about the league he plays in. But he goes from Chelsea, in one of the best leagues in the world, and he's having an absolute disaster of a time. He goes to Milan with a coach who believes in him, and now another coach who believes in him, and an environment that is more appealing to him or more fitting with his personality, and he's thriving. Was he a bad player at Chelsea? No, of course he wasn't a bad player at Chelsea.
Injury and circumstance.
It's circumstance. It's not even to say that he couldn't achieve at Chelsea if things were different at Chelsea. It just that was not the place for him. And it doesn't make him a bad player that he couldn't achieve or he couldn't continue to achieve things at Chelsea the way that he wanted to. It doesn't make him a bad player. There are players who universally could go from one club to another and be great. Those are world-class players. Those are the players we put in the Hall of Fame in our minds. Those players are few and far between, and certainly the U.S. men's national team doesn't have any of those players right now. So you absolutely, as a manager, as a coach, have to be willing and open to anybody, depending on what their situation is and how they're playing.
Hopefully we're there at some point here in the near future where that is the case, but not just yet. If you'd like to throw your 2 cents in, leave a comment on the video, send us a message at morningkickaround@gmail.com or hit us up on the social medias, mkickaround on X and Instagram.